point, and I'd like to introduce then our main speaker, Larry McHenry, who is an amateur astronomer of 40 plus years experience and gives a lot of talks at the Cherry Springs and the Black Forest Star Parties. Very knowledgeable about astronomy in general. Also writes articles for the Astronomical League magazine, which everybody who's an FBAC member is also a member of Astronomical League, so you get the magazines. So you might have read one of his articles in the past. Larry's going to talk about Charles Messier, and I know we talk a lot about Charles Messier in our outreach, and I'm sure there's still quite a bit for us to learn. There's things probably that we think we know, but don't really know. So we're really excited to learn from Larry tonight and see what he can tell us so that we can go out and share that with everybody at our outreach sessions. So we've recently switched from Zoom to Teams. So as we switch over here, this is the first time we're doing it. So bear with us here, and we'll go ahead and switch over to Larry. So Larry, can you please share, and then Lee will try to move over your presentation.
I'll go ahead and proceed. So again, thank you for having me here tonight. My name is Larry McHenry. I'm an amateur astronomer from Western Pennsylvania, Pittsburg, Pennsylvania, actually, and belong to a couple clubs up here. One called the Kiski Astronomers, another one called the Oil Region Astronomical Society. So tonight we're going to talk about Charles Messier, the Ferret of Comets. French astronomer Charles Messier, hopefully most of you have heard of him, is one of the best known astronomers and comet hunters from the Age of Enlightenment, which marked the birth of modern science. We're going to talk a little bit about his life, and we're also going to talk about his greatest contribution to astronomy, his list of deep sky objects to avoid while you're comet hunting, his catalog of nebula and star clusters. So high level, what we're going to talk about, let me see here, hide that, there we go. So high level, what we're going to talk about Charles Messier, a little bit about his early years, his childhood. Then we're going to jump right into talking about the observatory where he worked, the equipment that he used, which some of that's kind of interesting. And then we're going to talk about his observations, comets, and maybe a few other types of objects he might be interested in. And then we're going to kind of talk a little bit more about his personal life to make him a little bit more of a well-rounded figure to you. And then we'll talk about his legacy, and we'll wrap up the presentation. And then we'll take questions afterwards, and I'll be happy to stick around and later on. There is a handout that goes with the presentation. Messier objects you might see tonight. And on this handout, you'll have my website on the lower bottom, and also my email address. If you have a question you think of after the presentation's over, you can just pop me an email and say, hey, I saw you on the Fort Bend Astronomy Club meeting, and just ask your question. I'll try to answer. So, early years. Charles Joseph Messier was born on June 26, 1730, in a small village of Badenvilliers, located in the Lorraine region of France. Charles was the 10th child born out of eventually a total of 12 to his father Nicholas and his mother Francois Messier. At the time, the region that they lived in was a small semi-independent state where his father Nicholas was a court usher for the state princes. This allowed his family to live kind of a decent, well-off lifestyle in a large house. Still, during Charles' youth, though, 6 of his 12 siblings passed away from various things while he was young. At the age of 11 in 1741, Charles's father, Nicholas, passed away. Charles himself had a close brush with death when, as a child, he fell out of an upper story window and broke his leg. Due to the family's financial constraints when Charles's father passed, Charles had to drop out of school, and he had to, one of his older brothers actually finished Charles's education, teaching Charles how to be an administrator, how to do administrative work, writing, copying, things like that. Now, while as a teenager, Charles developed an interest in astronomy by the appearance of the six-tailed comet of 1744, and a few years later in 1748 by an annular solar eclipse that was visible from his hometown. From this spark, Charles began observing the stars and learning the phenomena of the night sky. In 1751, Charles, now age 21, left home to go to Paris to look for work. With help from a family friend of his late father, Charles was able to get an interview with astronomer Joseph Delisle, the official astronomer of the French Navy. Delisle found Charles's fine handwriting skills and his drawing skills particularly useful and hired him as his assistant to work there at the Royal Navy, which was actually located on top of a hotel there in Paris called the Hotel de Cluny, and where Delisle lived in one of the hotel wings. So Messier was actually given a room in the hotel wing that Delisle and his wife lived at, and he moved in there. So Messier's job working for Delisle was to keep careful records of observations and copy maps and charts for use at the observatory. He was also to learn how the observatory functioned. He was instructed in his various telescopes. Delisle took it upon himself to teach Charles elementary astronomy and precise record keeping and measuring exact positions for his observations. Messier excelled at this type of work, and he found it very suitable for his skills that his older brothers had taught him when he was younger. By 1754, Charles was promoted to be a clerk of the Navy and was actually starting to make a tidy little income. He became involved in projects around Paris, including creating a new city map of Paris, and also became involved in creating a new large-scale map of France. So, look, that's enough about Charles' background. Let's talk a little bit about the equipment that he used, starting with his observatory. The observatory was located again on a hotel called the Hotel de Cluny, which was originally a medieval townhouse built in 1334 for the Vatican abbots when they would visit Paris. It was constructed over the remnants of a 3rd century Roman bath in one of the oldest districts of Paris. The townhouse was rebuilt in 1485 for extended use by the local bishop, visitors from the Vatican, and the occasional royal who wanted to get away from the palace and stay somewhere overnight, and they would stay there. In the 18th century, the building was rented to the Royal Navy, and the tower was used as an observatory by a number of French astronomers. Now, on the roof of the tower was built a pyramidal structure with large side windows that could be opened in any directions. Inside was kept the portable observatory telescopes that could be positioned to point out whichever window the observer preferred. There was no fixed telescope at this observatory. They were all portable telescopes that you would pick up, walk over to the window, and point it out the window. After Messier's time, the observatory went unused and it fell into disrepair, and it was eventually removed from the tower. In 1843, the hotel was made into a public museum displaying historical objects from France's Middle Age Gothic past, and you can still visit this hotel today. It's still there. You can still go in and tour it. So, Charles Messier's telescopes. So here's a list of the various telescopes that Charles used at the hotel observatory. For the majority of his observing, Messier used a small 100 millimeter or 4-inch refractor. Now, the concept of interchangeable telescope eyepieces was not yet common in Messier's time. Most of his telescopes had a fixed eyepiece lens and magnification, which meant that you started off with a low power telescope out a window and you found something in the sky and you wanted to increase the magnification. You had to go get a bigger telescope and bring it over, point it out the same window, and reacquire that object. Very difficult method, I think, of doing astronomy, but that was the standard of the time. Now, while some of Messier's reflecting telescopes had somewhat large apertures for that time, all the way up to 8 inches in diameter mirrors, the mirrors weren't made out of glass and with silver on it like we have today. They were made out of what's called speculum metal. It was like a tin copper type of alloy. That they only had about maybe 70% reflectivity when brand new and polished. But generally, the mirrors would tarnish very quickly when they were exposed to the night air. And Messier spent a lot of time polishing these mirrors on these little telescopes that he had. Today's small refractor or reflector will easily outperform the best telescopes that Messier had. And while Messier's telescopes could be considered decisively mediocre, even by 18th century standards, Messier always claimed to be satisfied with them, as they generally worked well for what he was interested in doing: comet hunting. Now, let's talk about some of the observations that Charles Messier made, comets and some other objects. So Charles Messier's first personal documented astronomical observation was that of the transit of the planet Mercury, visible from Paris in May of 1753. Delisle was impressed by Messier's skill in making and recording the transit observation, along with Messier's proven knowledge of the observatory and its equipment, so much that Delisle decided to assign Messier in 1757 the task of searching for the first predicted return of Halley's Comet, which was a very important thing at the time. Delisle drew up calculated star charts with the most probable positions of the predicted comet's return for Messier to use in his nightly sweeps. Delisle instructed Messier to use the observatory's 4.5-foot Newtonian reflector, specifically follow the charts, keep meticulous observation records of every night, and don't waste any kind of time making any type of other observations. He was stick to the plan, basically, was what he was told to do. So during this period, Messier did recover his first returning comet in August of 1758, and he followed it through early November. Finally, though, on the night of January 21st, 1759, Messier swept up the faint glow of another comet. It was Halley's Comet on its return, appearing 52 days before reaching perihelion with the sun. Then, amazingly, for some reason, Delisle decided to hold off on announcing Messier's historic recovery of this comet. He instead instructed Messier to tell no one about it, but to just keep observing the comet until it was lost in the sun's glare. Nobody knows why Delisle told Messier not to report the comet. Maybe he didn't trust Messier's observations, but we don't know. But this delay in the discovery announcement was to become one of the greatest disappointments in Messier's life. While waiting for the comet to rise above the sun and become visible once again, news came to Paris that a German amateur astronomer from Dresden had actually been the first to see Halley's Comet way back in December. The news from Dresden had been delayed by several months. It was only now finally getting out, setting the astronomical world abuzz. Messier was devastated by his loss of recognition from being one of the first people to observe it. And it wasn't until early April that Delisle finally allowed Messier to publish his earlier observations of it. And of course, the lateness in releasing Messier's recovery led to additional skeptical criticism by other astronomers, and as to why was the observation kept so quiet. And of course, this caused more grief for Messier because, again, he couldn't answer those criticisms. He didn't know why. In the end, though, Messier decided that it was just better if he just stayed silent about it, loyal to his mentor, and just let it go. This actually ended up working in Messier's favor, as within a year of the 1761 transit of Venus, which Messier made a successful observation of, Delisle retired, and Messier was placed in charge of the observatory at the Hotel de Cluny, where he could now dedicate himself to what Charles thought was his life's purpose: hunting comets. So before long, in late 1763, January 1764, Charles discovered his first two comets using the observatory's telescopes. He followed that up in 1766 by discovering a naked eye comet that had been missed by all. But it was during his dark of the moon comet hunting that Messier began to notice a recurring problem: false comets. During his night sweeps looking for comets, Messier kept finding these faint, dim objects that somewhat resembled a comet, and he would take the time to record their position, watch for movement over hours, maybe even spending most of the entire evening tracking this object, only to finally realize he was wasting his time. The object wasn't moved. It was a fixed object. They weren't comets. They were just some type of faint nebula or unresolved cluster of stars that his telescopes weren't powerful enough to resolve. So Messier decided in May of 1764 to keep a list of these objects as he found them, so that during future comet sweeps, he could easily disregard these objects as not being the comets that he was interested in finding. Charles decided to start making his list by resurveying the already known 16 nebula from antiquity. Of course, these included the hazy clouds that we know today to be the Andromeda Nebula or galaxy, the Praesepe cluster, and of course the Orion Nebula. Messier then expanded his research to more recently discovered objects by other astronomers over the last 150 years, such as Lalande, Flamsteed, Lecal, and Bode, who had added additional starry spots, such as the clusters in the Scorpion's Tail, the ones in the middle of Auriga, the Charioteer, and of course the nebulous patches in Sagittarius the Archer and Scutum the Shield. Before the year was out, Messier had put together an observed list of 40 objects, 18 of which were newly discovered by him. Of course, the first object on this list, M1, Messier 1, is the little nebula in Taurus that he had stumbled upon way back in 1758 while searching for Halley's Comet. Of course, we know today this object is the supernova remnant, again called M1, and we also has a nickname that we call it the Crab Nebula. So this was Messier's very first object that he found himself. Of course, the second object that he discovered on his list, M2, is a partially resolvable ball of stars in the constellation of Aquarius. We know today this is a globular star cluster of many hundreds of thousands of stars orbiting our home galaxy. So, within a few short months of Messier thinking that he had finished his list of false comets, 40-some objects, he stumbled upon a new one, a faint cluster of stars in Canis Major, just below the bright star Sirius. Messier at that point knew that his search wasn't done, but some other projects had come up, forcing him to set aside this, continuing his list until the following year. One of these new projects was a non-astronomical project involving the sea trials of a new marine chronometer used in determining longitude. Messier spent a number of months at sea on the ships, making the necessary astronomical observations needed for doing the calibrations on testing these new clocks out. But finally, once he was finished with that in early 1769, he returned to his comet hunting sweeps, and he decided to write up his list of 41 non-comet objects, along, of course, a description of what each object looked like, and, of course, their celestial positions in the sky. But he felt that 41 wasn't a nice round number, so he decided to add a few more items to his list to make it a more well-rounded 45. And of course, these included the already known objects such as M45, the Pleiades, again, M44, the Praesepe cluster, of course, the Orion Nebula, M43, M42, to round out the list at 45 objects. Before he could publish that list, though, in August of 1769, Charles discovered a new comet that became one of the great comets of the 18th century, developing a dazzling coma and a tail over 90 degrees long. This comet even brought him royal recognition from the King of Prussia, Frederick the Great, by a written letter thanking Messier for his discovery, and also thanking Messier for sending the king a map and a description of the comet. Charles followed that up a year later in June of 1770 with another extraordinarily bright comet discovery that brought worldwide recognition. It was at this point that the King of France, Louis XV, gave Messier his nickname, the Ferret of Comets. So with these two great comet discoveries, Charles Messier was elected to the French Academy of Sciences. Shortly after, in 1771, he was made the official astronomer of the Navy, following in the footsteps of his old mentor, Joseph Delisle. Also in 1771, Messier was finally able to publish the first edition of his catalog of nebula and star clusters in the official journal of the French Academy. Charles Messier was now a world-renowned professional astronomer. But soon after publishing his catalog, Messier found 4 more objects to add to it. And they soon found a 5th in 1772, 2 more in 1774, and after a little bit of a dry spell, another one in 1777. Unfortunately, though, for whatever reason, Charles didn't always make his usual precision recording of some of the observations of these new objects, particularly M47 and M48, which led to some confusion for us future observers, misidentifying these objects. Again, M47 located very close to M46. A lot of people after him confused those two. M48 and Hydra. Again, it was confusion as to what was this cluster there. But eventually it was all resolved, more or less. Now, Messier continued to find additional new objects, such that in early 1780, he published a new revised list of 68 objects in the Academy Journal. He then went on with help from fellow French astronomer, friend, and comet hunter Pierre Macon to find another 32 faint nebula by April 1781, bringing his list up to now a total of 100 false comet objects. So just to deviate a little bit here, Pierre Macon, Charles Messier's buddy, lived 1744 to 1804. Pierre was gifted in physics and mathematics. His abilities in astronomy was noticed by the prominent French astronomer Joseph Lalande, who hired Pierre as a proofreader. Lalande helped Macon secure a post as an assistant with the Navy Department of Maps and Charts. And through this job, he met Charles Messier, and the pair hit it off, became great friends. They worked together over the years as fellow astronomers on various projects there in Paris. So right before Charles was ready to publish that new list of 100 objects, Macon sent him 3 more objects, and Messier threw them in the list. But unfortunately, Macon, in his haste to get those objects to Messier, ended up duplicating the second entry, M102, leading once again to confusing future observers. Of course, we know today M102 is, again, a little galaxy there in the constellation of Draco. So during this period, Charles Messier went on to discover 7 more comets. One in 1771, 1773, 1780, 85, 88, 93, and 1798. Messier eventually became the co-discoverer of 21 comets and made observations of a total of 41 individual comets, including both new discoveries that he made himself and also picking up previously returning comets. Of the 45 comets discovered between 1758 and 1801, Messier accounted for almost half of that total. Very prolific comet hunter. Now, during this time, Messier had planned on revising his 103 objects catalog with some additional searches that he had made. From the article in the French Academy Journal for 1801, Messier outlined plans to publish another further updated version of his catalog. That he had stated in this article that he had observed still other nebulous objects. But with various distractions, such as injuries from an accident that we're going to talk about here in a minute, the bloody French Revolution, and William Herschel's deep sky searches using far superior equipment than what Messier had, Charles never really did move forward with his revisions and publishing that list, so it was kind of stuck at 103. But over the centuries, as missing documents and manuscripts from both Messier and Macon have been found by astronomers and historians, the case was made to expand Messier's list to 110 objects, to include those that Messier was thought to have planned on including in his final revision. Today, most sources now include those last 7 objects, But there's still some doubt about the identity of several of those, including, of course, M102 from Macon, and, of course, M108 and M109, some faint little galaxies in Ursa Major. And finally, though contested by some, M110, the satellite galaxy to M31, is generally considered to be the final object in Charles Messier's catalog. Though Messier never listed it as an individual object, he did include it with his sketch of M31, and he did describe it with the entry with M31. So everybody kind of gives him credit for discovering M110. Now, out of the modern Messier catalog, Messier himself had independently found 65 of the 110 objects. His friend and associate, Pierre Macon, contributed 25 original discoveries. The remaining other 20 objects came from earlier sources and observers. Of the 110 objects that we know today that 40 of them are galaxies, 29 are globular clusters, 27 are open clusters, 6 are diffuse nebula, 4 are planetary nebula, 1 is a supernova remnant, and then there's 3 miscellaneous objects. One's a star cloud, another's a double star, and the last one is just an asterism of 4 stars that Messier couldn't resolve. And again, here's a list of some of my favorite Messier objects that are actually well placed tonight. So hopefully you'll have dark skies. You can get out there tonight and check them out after the meeting. Now, let's talk a little bit about Messier's personal life, just to make sure he's a well-rounded figure to us. So during all this comet hunting, all these discoveries of these false comet objects, cataloging them, things like that, Charles Messier found time to get married. He married a local lady, Marie-Françoise Vermonderkamp, on November 26, 1770, after courting her over a 15-year period. I guess wow. he really took his time with that. In the fall of 1771, the couple moved from the old Delisle apartment wing to better, roomier sections within the hotel. There, on March 15th, 1772, Marie gave birth to a son who they named Anthony. But unfortunately, the delivery did not go well for either the mother or the child, and Marie never recovered, and she passed away about a week later on March 23rd, followed a few days later by their son on March 26th. Messier was devastated by their deaths. Now, according to popular legend going around a few years later after their deaths, Messier's deep display of grief over his son and wife's death was as much from his missing the discovery of a comet while attending to them on their deathbed. Of course, it's been determined that this was actually a false story, a malicious rumor by some of Messier's contemporaries who didn't like him. But the comet in question was actually discovered a week before the ill-fated delivery. In any event, Messier was definitely devastated by their deaths. He went back home to Baden-Villiers in Lorraine. He spent a good 3 to 4 months there in mourning, but eventually he started feeling better, and he returned back to Paris. He took up his old job as the astronomer of the Navy at the hotel. Now, about 10 years later, while Charles and some friends were visiting a park owned by the royal family, he was seriously injured in an accident. Now, this park, and I can't remember the name of it right now. It's in Paris. This park was famous for having these little buildings on it, like little Greek temples or like pyramids and things like that. And that you would enter these and like go down steps and travel through a secret tunnel and come up in another part of the park into maybe another temple or something like that. A lot of fun for the time, apparently. But anyways, Charles was strolling along one of the many garden paths by himself, and he noticed this little building that he hadn't previously seen, and he saw that it was a small door in it, and he thought, it was one of these other buildings that went to another section of the park. So he stepped into the dark interior and then fell 25 feet into an old ice cellar that he was no longer being used and had been unlocked for some reason. He had to be rescued by ropes and ladders. He received a severe bloody head wound. He broke multiple bones, including several ribs, one of his wrists and arms, in his right thigh, which eventually didn't heal up cleanly and had to be rebroken by his doctor. Can you imagine that? Back in that time frame, no anesthesia, had to re-break your thigh. But anyways, this left Charles with a permanent limp, became disabling in his old age. Messier was laid up for a very long time from this accident. It was almost a year before he could return to work back at the observatory. So again, this was a serious accident to his health. So during Charles Messier's lifetime, he gained many honors. In 1764, he was elected a member of the Royal Society of London. He was elected a foreign member of both the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences and the Berlin Academy of Sciences. Of course, in 1770, he was elected to the French Academy of Sciences, his most cherished membership. 1758, he became the editor of the French Academy of Science journals, served that for a 5-year term. He lived through the bloody French Revolution, where the guillotine claimed a number of his close friends and colleagues, but he eventually did go on to receive the Legion of Honor from Napoleon himself in 1806 for his lifetime work in astronomy. But soon after he received that award, he went into semi-retirement, but he still occasionally used the old observatory at the hotel, which now had started to fall into disrepair with no one really to look at. And again, Messier, because of his crippling accident, had a lot of trouble even getting up to the observatory. 1815, Messier had a stroke, which partly paralyzed him. And then finally, in the spring of 1817, at the age of 87, Charles came down with a virus that was going around Paris, and after a few days, he passed away on April 12th of that year. So, legacy and conclusion. Well, over the course of his lifetime, Charles Messier discovered 21 new comets, including the great comets of 1769, 1770. He's also credited with the first recovery observations of many previously found comets, including being one of the first to recover Halley's Comet 1759. Like most astronomers of the day, in addition to his comet observations, Charles Messier also observed the planets Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars when they were at favorable oppositions, along with the moon and its various craters. And during the daytime, he would successfully observe transits across the sun by both Mercury in 1753, 1782, and Venus in 1761. And he tracked and recorded over 100 solar sunspot observations, and he even found time to keep records of daily weather conditions in the city of Paris. He's a very busy person. He was also involved in 1781 in the follow-up confirmation observations of William Herschel's newly discovered object, putting his then considerable comet hunting expertise into validating that this Herschel object was not some new form of a comet, but was instead a new planet, the planet Uranus. This, of course, then led to a long, friendly relationship between the two great observers, with Herschel actually traveling twice to Paris to visit Charles Messier. In 1775, French astronomer Jérôme Lalande created a new constellation named after Charles Messier. He called it Cousteau's Messier. This constellation was located on the borders between Cepheus, Cassiopeia, Camelopardalis, but unfortunately it did not receive widespread support from the astronomical world and was fairly quickly dropped from usage. But Charles Messier's lifetime achievements was honored by the astronomical community by naming a pair of the moon's craters after him, and of course more recently, an asteroid 7359 discovered on January 16th, 1996 has been named Messier in his honor. But none of this is what Charles Messier is known for today. Instead is his list of diffuse objects to avoid while comet hunting, his catalog of nebula and star clusters that today's modern amateur astronomers seeks out as the bright showcase galaxies, nebula, star clusters of the night sky. His 110 deep sky objects listed in books, observing guides, magazines, and star atlases over the centuries, beloved by today's amateurs, is his legacy. This is what Charles Messier, the ferret of comets, is renowned for in the 21st century. So that does wrap up my introduction to Charles Messier, the man. If you'd like to learn more about Charles Messier, of course, the internet can be your friend. You can just Google Charles Messier, go to Wikipedia, lots of great information there about him. There's a specific website called Students for Exploration and Development of Space, or abbreviated as SEDS. They have a wonderful Messier database on all his observations, lots of detail in his life. Of course, you like to read about Charles Messier in a book. One of my favorite books about him is Messier's Nebula and Star Clusters by Kenneth Glyn Jones. Highly recommend that book, great observing tool. If you'd like to see more of my observations of Charles Messier's objects, you can go to my website, stellar-journeys.org, which again is listed on the handout. Scroll down to the Messier Objects Tour. That will pop up a page, and then from there you can select the Messier object you're interested in. That will pop up a little window displaying sketches or video capture images that I've done over the years. If you like to read this presentation, you can also scroll further down the table of contents on my site, and you'll to the PDF download page, and there you'll find this presentation along with many other presentations that I've done over the years. Definitely something on a cloudy night, help put you to sleep. Again, here's my handout that goes with the presentation, Messier objects you might see tonight, and I believe all these are well placed for observing tonight in the summer sky. And with that, I will conclude my presentation on Charles Messier, and I'll be happy to open the floor to any questions that you might have about the man or his list of 110 objects to observe.
Any questions, Todd?
Hey, Larry, this is Todd Donovan. Question, I'm taking a look at the handout, and I see the top row you took with Dobbs. You indicate the eyepieces that you took. So I'm assuming that all of those are based on manual sketches. Is that true?
Yes, it is correct. Those are all sketches. Back in the years, late 90s, early 2000s, I was a visual observer. I did a lot of sketching with different types. Nowadays, I'm in the EAA. So.
Yeah, that's some pretty good work. I think a lot of us could learn from you.
Oh yeah, highly recommend. If you're getting started into astronomy, visual is really the way to go before you try astrophotography. Enjoy the night sky, looking at the brighter objects, the clusters, things like that, and then try photography.
Yeah, Larry, this is Bill Dillon. I have a question. Some
Yes.
of these objects, like M44, are clearly star clusters. I don't see how he would confuse that with a comet.
Right.
I mean, some of these are
right.
clearly comet-like, but some of these things are not comet-like, or I don't think they are, even with a small scope.
Right. Yeah, he could definitely tell that those were not comets, and some of those were, again, like M44, M45 from antiquity. Antiquity, they were well known at the time. He just wanted to make his list all inclusive, basically, so he included those. But there are some other objects that we today have no trouble resolving. But again, you got to remember his telescopes that he was using were all very small little things, and again, they were good for sweeping up comets, but not necessarily resolving some of the more tighter star clusters. But yeah, you're correct. A lot of these objects were already well known.
Okay. The other question I had is, were they actually observing through windows? You mentioned that the glass at that time, was kind of wavy and stuff. Were they opening the windows up?
Yes. They actually opened the windows up.
Okay.
They didn't look through them. But again, it was like a glass, almost like a greenhouse on top of the hotel, and they would just go to whichever side they wanted, whichever direction you wanted to look. You'd open the windows up and point the telescope out and sweep with it.
Okay, thanks.
But again, can you imagine that? They all had fixed magnification. So if he's starting out with a small refractor and he found something and he had to go grab another telescope, he had to take the time to find the object again. That's just,
we're gonna go from one bill.
When I first learned that was just like blew my mind. Good question. Thank you.
Hello, Larry. My name is Bill Messier. Excellent presentation. I'm an amateur astronomer for many decades.
Mhm.
And I know all about Charles Messier until tonight when I learned a whole bunch more. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
My question is, when you were talking about the observatory on top of the tower, on top of the hotel,
Yes.
you mentioned all the telescopes were portable. And if I
Yes.
read your chart right, one of them was 25 feet long. And so does that qualify as a portable telescope?
Yeah, so that's actually that's back to the style of the day when they that was the focal length. It wasn't really 25 feet long. They were small portable. That's just the you know,
Focal length.
yeah, they referred to everything in feet back then.
Huh?
You know, modern telescopes are, we don't call them that anymore. But I probably should have updated that slide to more modern equivalents. But again, most of them were like small, portable refractors, little Newtonians, Gregorian type telescopes, Herschelian type telescopes, and small things again that you could pick up, walk over, and point it out a window.
I understand. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah,
Again,
my apologies for that. I guess that is confusing now that I think about it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. I highly encourage everybody that, as you read about, let's go look up this Herschel object or this Messier object, try to read a little bit about the person behind it, our predecessors, and who they were and how they went about observing and everything. It does make it more interesting, when you're observing those objects.
Steve Clayworth had a question. He's online. Are any Messier observatories preserved? Are any observatories preserved?
Well, there's really only one observatory he had there on the hotel, and of course it's been disassembled, taken down. But you can still visit the hotel there in Paris, and I don't know if they let you up on top of the tower or not. I'm sure. But as far as his little telescopes, that is a good question. I don't know if any of them are still around, to tell you the truth. That's a good question.
James, hold on a second.
Now, Messier is known for all the stuff he didn't want us to look at. Messier is known for all the stuff he didn't want us to see. Are there any famous comet Messiers? Are there any famous? Yeah.
Yeah, there are several that has his name on it, but a lot of them are faint. They're nothing that the modern comet observer would really hunt out. I mean, he did discover some, like the great comets of 17, I forget the dates, 69, 1770. But most of the other ones actually have his name on it. They're not really observable, or they're very faint. They don't get very bright.
That's pretty amazing considering he had small telescopes. They're pretty faint.
Yeah. And pretty amazing he did this from the city of Paris.
Holy moly.
Of course, back in that day, back in the day, that was before they had, electricity, before gas lighting even, so, no light pollution exactly. You could walk out your front door and there's the Milky Way,
That's cool. Any other questions? All right. Well, Larry,
So again, go ahead.
Thank you for the great presentation, and we're very appreciative of all the information we got tonight. We all learned something. So.
Awesome, good. Happy to hear that. And again, I encourage everybody. I think you got clear weather down there tonight. Get out tonight, and again, some of these are well placed, or will be well placed in another hour or two. And again, as you're observing the Lagoon Nebula M8 or M22, the big globular cluster there in Sagittarius, just think about that French astronomer there in Paris looking at through a tiny little telescope at these guys, trying to figure out what they were and being mad that they're not comets. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Again, if you have any questions later on, feel free to email me. I'll be happy to try to answer them. Thank you.